Thank you. I have to do what the board president says. No, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. And I appreciated that music. The song was perfect. Everything from the reading to the song, that's the whole talk. That's what it's all about. So a week ago, Saturday, we were informed of another hate-inspired mass shooting that took place in Pittsburgh with our brothers and sisters who are Jewish. And yesterday, on Saturday, this community joined with our Jewish community here in this town to put an event together, our little portion of the event at the Ren Fair. We had our booth together, and it was an absolutely wonderful time we spent with our brothers and sisters of the Jewish faith. And there was no time during that I was concerned about being involved in something that included Jewish people, although somebody did mention, I sure hope no one decides to take out their anger on us. And so I thought about that because I thought about what's gone through our communities here of late. There was the Jewish temple. Then there was the African American church that we heard was spared because they actually had their doors locked the same day that the person went into the Jewish temple. And then a yoga studio this week, a yoga studio. In that situation, it was because this man didn't like women. A few weeks prior, our Unitarian church here experienced hate-inspired racist vandalism. Fear instigated by fear. And then fear that starts to instill and could possibly instill more fear. Hopefully not, but that's sort of rippling out there in our communities. So I wanted to note that this month's Science of Mind magazine, its entire focus is on being untethered from fear. There are a lot of excellent articles in there. The magazine is in the bookstore. I suggest if you don't get it, pick one up because there's a lot in there to help untether us from fear. And then last month's topic was Love Dissolves All Fear. And the song was perfect this morning, again, talking about love and bringing that love and God into that presence of whatever it is that's showing up. But our outer world continues to challenge our inner world. It continues to create for us opportunities where we need to put our philosophy into practice. Last week, when Peggy was speaking, she talked about the oneness from which we are all made, our source. And she even said, I'm made of the same stuff as Hitler. And essentially, that's true in the sense that all humans are created from the same source. But what I believe is that Hitler and his followers were an extreme example of what happens when we forget that oneness. When we don't realize that we are one with every aspect of God's creation. And so when we remember what Hitler and his followers did to the Jewish people, to gay people, to people with disabilities, and then we think about what is happening today to people who have Jewish faith, to people of color, to gay and transgendered people, and all kinds of people, women, today. Each time something happens, like what happened at the temple, I think that some of us have this thought, there, but for the grace of God, go I. As the community spiritual leader here in this center, after hearing what happened at the UU Church, after hearing what happened in a place of worship for our Jewish brothers and sisters, and after hearing several years ago in 2015 about what happened in the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, each time I started to think, there but for the grace of God, and then I stopped myself because I don't want to add to that energy in my thinking. And yet this time, as it started to cross my mind, I decided to ask myself, what exactly does that phrase mean anyway? What do we mean when we say, there but for the grace of God, go I? What beliefs are behind that statement? Usually, I think there's a feeling of, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me. That somehow God graced me, but didn't whoever has experienced these things that we don't want to experience. Like for some reason, I was specially chosen out. And we know, as people who study religious science, we know God doesn't work that way. God doesn't grace some and not others. Ernest Holmes explicitly talks about how the law works the same for everyone who puts it into action. So it's not about, there but for the grace of God go I. So then I thought, well, what is grace anyway? What does grace mean? Because that's been one of those words that I've had question about over the years. So I looked it up, and there was actually definitions that are nouns and then a definition that was a verb. The noun says simple elegance, a refinement of movement, as in she's graceful or that kind of grace. Then the second meaning had in parentheses Christian belief, the free and unmerited favor of God. And that's the one I think that most people sort of have flitting through their mind when they say that phrase. That somehow it's unmerited, but the favor has been put upon someone. Then there's the verb, to do honor or credit to someone or something by one's presence. To do honor or credit to someone or something by one's presence. Now that one caught my attention. But before I explain to you why, I want to share with you something funny that happened this week here at the center at Our Lady's Luncheon. I was sitting across from Edie while we were eating, and I sort of overheard her talking. I wasn't really paying attention to the whole conversation, and she was talking about this comma that's had this effect on people. And I said, wait a minute, I don't get it. What kind of comma are you talking about? And she started laughing, just like she is now. No, not comma. You know comma, K-A-R-M-A. Karma. Oh, okay. Well, I was laughing because I had been picturing this big universal comma that had some kind of effect on people. And the reason was because in my mind, I'd already been thinking about this talk. I'd been thinking about that sentence and the importance that a comma can have in a sentence. And I was going to put a comma into that sentence so that it had a different meaning for me and a different expression. I want to say there, comma, but for the grace of God, comma, go I. Think about that. If we're thinking about grace as that presence, doing honor and credit, and I was thinking if we're giving God honor and credit for being present, there, for that grace of God, go I. Where I perceive a need, where I perceive that there's some healing that needs to take place, where I may perceive that a situation is devoid of God, even though I know that there is no place that God is not, so that God is everywhere present. I get that feeling sometimes like, oh, where was God in that? When that happens, that is where I need to go. I go where I'm moved. And I had this thought also that we can go there in person or in prayer. We take ourselves into that situation, and in doing so, that's how the grace of God, that presence of God, shows up. It shows up in and through us. So I started thinking about the phrase again, and I realized that the place that I first heard it was at a 12-step meeting. I was going to a women's open meeting, and so I always just got to listen to these women's stories. And often there would be this, they'd be thinking about a friend or someone who was still out using or drinking, and they would say, oh, but for the grace of God, go I. Remembering how close they might have been to that life, and they found sobriety, they found a way to live a healthier life. And yet, as I thought about it, I started thinking that even in that situation, it's not because there's an outside God that bestowed some grace on some people and left others out there using. I don't believe it works that way. Grace might have showed up through a friend or a sponsor. And then I believe grace showed up because of the choices we make. When we made a choice to take ourselves to a meeting or to bring ourselves to a center like this where we got to learn about how principles work. When we made a choice to do the work, whether it's the work that takes place in classes and thinking about how to apply principle in our life, or whether it's the work of a 12-step program. When we made a choice to be willing to allow change to take place in our lives. And so I started to see grace as not a passive thing that I just sort of sit there and hope is bestowed on me, but grace is the activity of me and Spirit together making choices. I'm an active participant in the grace that's expressed in this world, that presence of God that shows up in this world. So this month, we're focused on practicing sacred giving. And so it came to me that the ultimate act of sacred giving is when we give ourselves as grace, as that presence of God in any situation. The awareness of God, that love, that good, that peace, that is our sacred act of giving when we are consciously giving that grace through us and allowing it to work through us. So as I thought about this, it reminded me of a story that I heard a lot as a kid. And this story is part of what I believe is my early spiritual or moral teachings. And they did not come from going to church. I didn't go to church. But I was sitting on my father's knee as he would read to us, and he often read from Dr. Seuss. And that's where I got a lot of my early teachings. And this story just happens to be titled, "What Was I Scared Of?" And it's a story about a little creature that is going about his daily life, doing what we do with our life. He went fishing, he was riding a bike, he went shopping. But every place he went, these pale green pants with nobody inside them kept showing up. And the more they showed up, the more scared this little creature got. Everything he tried to do, these pale green pants with nobody inside them, was doing the same thing, was rowing another boat, was riding another bicycle. So I'm not going to read the whole story, but I'm going to pick it up from the place where this little creature needed to go out and pick a peck of snide. Dr. Seuss was good at creating things, and we don't know what they were, but we get the gist. This was important. He had to go out at night to do this. And while he was doing that, he reached through a bush to pick and touched those pale green pants. And this is what he said. "And there I was, caught in the snide, and in that dreadful place, those spooky, empty pants and I were standing face to face. I yelled for help. I screamed, I shrieked, I howled, I yelled, I cried. Oh, save me from those pale green pants with nobody inside." But then a strange thing happened. Why, those pants began to cry. Those pants began to tremble. They were just as scared as I. I never heard such whimpering, and I began to see that I was just as strange to them as they were strange to me. I put my arms around their waist, I got to show you that side, and sat right down beside them. I calmed them down, poor empty pants with nobody inside them. And now we meet quite often, those empty pants and I, and we never shake or tremble. We both smile and we say hi. So I started out today talking about how fear instigates fear. And what I learned as a young kid from that story, I started thinking about how something that might scare me could be just as scared of me as I was of it or them, whoever or whatever it was. And so I think about things like racism and anti-Semitism and all the other isms that we have, and it's fear. It's the fear behind it. And usually there's fear of that whatever those people, that person is, there's mutual fear. It goes both ways. We talk about mutual admiration society, and I think right now we're having a mutual fear society, and we need to stop that cycle. We need to break it in some way. And in this story, I know it was simplified, but the little creature finally stopped what it was doing, all that busy stuff, and sat down and put his arms around those pale green pants, and they connected. And so from the reading, this is in August, our reading from Science of Mind magazine in August that Tina did is actually Ernest Holmes' words. I wanted to make sure that you knew that that whole reading was all Ernest Holmes. And in here he said, "So true givingness is the transmitting of the self to everything we do. It doesn't matter what it is, the outpouring of ourself into every undertaking with an enthusiastic zest, love, kindness, and friendliness." And so that's what happened in that story. All of a sudden it was like, let's drop the fear here, let's get real and give that love, give that self into that situation. Last week, Peggy brought up the Bible. She said it dropped out, it was just showed up, and so she quoted from it. And this week, I had what I thought was a quote going through my head. So I looked it up. It was from the same book that she was quoting from John. And I realized I was thinking it a little differently, but this is what it said. "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." I was saying it in my mind as greater gift has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends, because we were talking about sacred giving. But it was, instead of the word gift, was the word love. And I thought, well, you could pretty much interchange those, that there's no greater gift or no greater love. And then I started thinking about, well, what exactly does that one mean, to lay down one's life for one's friends? I think we've often interpreted it to mean that someone was willing to give up their physical life for someone else. And we think about that in terms of people who go into the military, first responders, people who are willing to put their life on the line for others. And it can clearly mean that. But I also started thinking about it in a different way. I started thinking about what happened in that story that I read and what we sometimes do. When we lay down our life, it can be putting our life aside for our friends, for whatever reason. Putting down the busyness, putting down that to-do list so we take time to connect, like that creature did with those pale green pants. Taking time to face our fears and each other and just connect with each other. That sacred givingness is love. There is no greater gift than that, to give that love, to lay down one's life so we can connect with each other. So we can choose how to express that, how we might lay down our life in some way in order to be that grace, that presence, and that love that comes through for someone else. I believe that musicians do it when they perform their music and when they create music. It's like life goes into suspense as that creative force comes through and they bring something there for us. I believe artists do that through their artwork. I believe that each one of us has a way that we do that because that givingness of spirit moves through us so naturally. Imagine what happens if you're doing your life and you get a call from your friend, your best friend, that says, "I need you now. I need to talk." Does your life get laid down for your friend in that moment? Yeah, that's what it's about. And I think it could also be when we do our civic duty of laying down our life and going to vote. I'm not going to tell you which way to vote, but I'm going to say, come here tomorrow and hold the consciousness and meditation and support all those who are voting the next day, and do that. Lay down your life for a moment and vote for the sake of our friends, so to speak, our community, our culture. This community right here, this Center for Spiritual Living, I believe is filled with grace, with that kind of grace, where we do lay down our lives and we give that sacred gift of our life for each other, and we support each other in so many ways. And sometimes That sacred gift of giving could be laying down our resources in some way, maybe laying down that extra latte or that thing we need to buy so that we can contribute to the center in a way that supports it for us and our friends. Or just laying down a piece of our life supply for that same purpose. In fact, I figured that most of you would see the topic this month, practicing sacred giving, and assume that you were going to get an entire talk about tithing. And I thought about that might be what this month was focused on, how we give to support each other. But this other talk needed to come through today. So all I'm going to say about tithing is, first of all, it works. There are many of us here that already practice it. This center practices it. We tithe 10% of everything that comes through here. And today the tithe committee will be determining where that 10% for November is going to. So if you have any questions about how it works, go to that meeting, and the folks there that already practice it can share. You can talk to me, talk to any practitioner, and find out how it works. And that's all I'm going to say about it, except that the principle behind tithing is the same principle behind all giving. And I think it was worded really well in August 16th's daily guide from the Science of Mind magazine. Our world is a corresponding reciprocal world. What we give to it mentally and physically is what daily presents itself at the threshold of our lives. Yet the giving has no motive. It is not a give-to-get strategy, but rather a sacred offering for the gratitude of being inspired. Through the energy of that gratitude, reciprocity happens. My giving isn't a tactic to place an obligation on another. It is done freely, realizing that whatever I may need arrives from an infinite array of yet-to-be-defined sources. And then the affirmation for the day was, I live to give. And I believe that that's true, largely because, as we've said, we are one with God, one with Spirit, and its nature is givingness. Thus, our nature is that givingness, that reciprocity, that giving and taking. As we do whatever it means to us to lay down our lives for our friends, as we do that, this is not about martyrdom in my book. I don't believe in that. And it's not about going beyond giving what is healthy for us. Sacred giving, as we give to others, also feeds us. Everyone who worked with me in the tent yesterday said, this is fun. We were giving of our time, our energy, our physical expression, and yet we had fun. It was feeding us as much as it was feeding anyone else, literally and figuratively. That sacred giving, when we give and allow that grace to move through us, it not only gives outward, but it gives back to us. I thought about it kind of like the heart, and I know I use the body analogies a lot, but the heart pumps that blood out to the rest of the body, but it also pumps blood back to itself, and it's all intertwined. We use the two words give and receive, and yet they're really the same thing. It's just they're moving in different directions for a moment. In sign language, the sign to give is this, but it's also this. You can give to me, and I might say, I'm receiving. But the sign is the same, or it can be this way. It just moves. And so in my mind, they're very similar. As we give, it's coming back. It's just a cycle. It's a movement. Sacred giving doesn't deplete us. It feeds us. So that's how you can know when you're in that flow. So I have one last thought that I wanted to share about all of this that was percolating in my mind this week. Reverend Kylie from originally the Albuquerque Center, and now she has the Ohm Center in Albuquerque. She posted on Facebook a story about a man whose name was A.J. Muste. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, M-U-S-T-E. He was apparently a peace activist during the Vietnam War. And what he chose to do was to stand in front of the White House and hold a single candle for night after night after night. And finally, a reporter asked him, do you really think that your single act of protest can change the policies of this country? And his reply was, oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do it so the country won't change me. Now, I could do a whole other talk on what I think our relationship with our country is. I think any relationship is going to change us. So that's a whole nother topic. What I got from that statement was, we're not letting what goes on out there change who we are, the truth of who we are. So however we feel called to move, whether we take ourselves into some kind of activity in person or through prayer, as we bring our grace, we're doing that so that that outward stuff doesn't change us. It didn't shut down the temple's booth yesterday. It didn't stop us from working with them. It's not going to change us. We continue to take our love and our grace wherever we go. Ernest Holmes also wrote in the October Science of Mind magazine, and it's out of his book, How to Talk to God. I am laying at the feet of love all of my weakness and uncertainty, all of my past mistakes, and I added in my mind, and my fears. I am no longer afraid of them. I know they are going to be lost in something bigger. Let's not be afraid to commune with that something that is greater than we are. Let's not hesitate to do this individually or in groups. It is wonderful for people to get together and pool their faith, each upholding the conviction of the other. It's like singing in a chorus. It's like an anthem of life and hope. One person's faith will strengthen another's. Sometimes it seems as though each one of us brings a feeble lamp into a great hall, and lifting up our lamp, we find the rays joining with those of others until all the darkness disappears and a great light fills the room. I loved that thought of laying it down at the feet of love. Or something about that. I kept telling myself that all week. I'm just laying it down at the feet of love. And holding up a lamp or a candle, whatever it is, we uphold that. That's our sacred gift of grace, of love, of ourself that we bring into that dark hallway. We bring it in person or in prayer. But for the grace of God, there I go. And so it is.